Try not to die by tripping over yourself, Quinn. A boy shouted down the hallway, laughing uncontrollably right after. Quinn dismissed the petty mockery as he carried on walking down the school corridor. The harassment had become a daily occurrence for him, but it still bothered him just as much as it did every other day. Thus, he wasn't able to hold back his desire to retaliate. Quinn slowed down his stride and stopped. He pushed his glasses back up onto the ridge of his nose as they had slipped down from his face. Just from looking at the glasses, it was clear that he needed a new pair. One could tell that they were heavily worn. The glasses looked crooked as he wore them, and even the temples had tape covering them. He then turned around and immediately raised his middle finger, responding to the slander, "I bet you don't even know how many fingers I'm holding up." Upon hearing the taunt, the boy clenched his fist and started running towards Quinn. "You level 1 piece of crap. When are you going to learn that you don't belong in this world?" The boy placed both of his hands together, and a green ball of light started to form between them. When he was only a few meters away from Quinn, the boy threw his hands forward and a green beam shot out from the palm of his hands. Quinn had nowhere to go, and the ray of light was too fast for him to dodge. Hence, he knew that all he could do was grit his teeth and bear the pain. As the light hit him, his body was lifted into the air and sent flying backward onto the far end corridor wall. "What's going on?" a student among the crowd said. "Are they fighting on the last day of school?" A crowd had immediately formed outside, interested in what the commotion was all about. One of the female students ran over to the wall's damaged part to check on the assaulted student's safety. As the dust started to settle down, Quinn's slightly curly black hair slowly came into view. When the smoke eventually cleared up, the female student finally saw who it was. She instantly backed away and continued on with her business as if nothing happened. The moment that the female student had returned to her friends, he could see that they were laughing at her. "I can't believe you tried to help him." "I didn't see who it was," the girl retorted, her cheeks flushed. After that, Quinn stood up and lifted his glasses that were thrown on the floor. To his dismay, one of the hinges had fallen off once again. Instead of wearing the worn-out pair, he let it hang on his hand. Damn it, not again. It was the last day of school for Quinn, so he hoped that someone wouldn't try anything with him. He was sick and tired of their doings, but he wasn't the type to ignore those either. He had seen people who had chosen to keep their heads down and tolerate the harassment. However, their treatment was far worse than what he received. He didn't bother to stay at school like the rest of the students. He picked up his broken glasses and proceeded to leave school. As he walked past, he saw the students having conversations among themselves in their circles. Some were laughing while some had tears, thinking it was the last time they would ever see each other again. However, Quinn wasn't a part of any of that and he didn't want to be. Cliques would not welcome him anyway. He was the weird one. When he finally arrived home, he immediately went to work. Living in a single-bedroom apartment with just enough space to fit a single bed and desk was enough for him. A TV was mounted on the wall, but Quinn would merely use it as a background noise source and didn't watch anything. The apartment was provided to him by the government since he had no living relatives and was only 16 years of age. On top of his bed was a single suitcase that contained all of his belongings that were neatly packed. He walked towards a cabinet, immediately pulling a drawer open which accommodated a single book. It was a large and thick hard-bound book, weighing about half a kilo. The front cover of the book was in a color that mimicked a lighter shade of blood. In the center, the lonesome fronts of an upper and lower jaw bone could be seen, both colored in the swampy shade of brown. The upper jaw sort of had 4 separated fangs. Meanwhile, the lower one had 2 sharp teeth on the 2 far ends on the overhead and 5 evenly spaced underneath. "Let's try again today," Quinn said as he lifted the book and placed it on top of the desk. He then quickly went to his bag to pull out a little test tube that was half filled with a colorless liquid. "Test 112, hydrochloric acid. Let's see how it goes." He then started to slowly pour the liquid out of the test tube onto the book. So far, there is no reaction. He proceeded to continue to pour all of the test tube contents on the book, but there was no reaction at the end of his experiment. Carefully, he examined the book while jotting down the results in his notebook. Seeing if there was any damage done, yet the book looked the same as always. Another failure. Why won't you open? Why did Mum and Dad even have this thing? 112 times, this was the number of different ways that Quinn had tried to open the book. Not only did the book not open, but it seemed like it cannot be damaged either. He had even tried burning the book, cutting the book, melting the book, though nothing had worked against the book that seemed utterly durable. Lying on his bed, he turned on the TV for its sole purpose, making background noises. He never really paid attention to what was on. With it, the sound of other voices made him feel less lonely. Upon turning on, the TV displayed an ongoing news show. The peace treaty with the Daki race has lasted for 5 years now, but officials are saying that tension is rising once again. Now, we must prepare for another war. The mention of war had always been shown on the TV non-stop ever since a certain day 30 years ago. The human race received a visit from the so-called Daki. They had the physique of humans, except for their skins that were riddled with scales and the presence of tails that were similar to what the dragons had. With no real clue of why they had suddenly appeared, they immediately demanded that the human race hand over their resources and wanted to use them as slaves. Of course, the humans decided to fight back, but they quickly found out that their modern technology was useless against them. Bullets couldn't penetrate their skin, and as for tanks, well, Daki had airships. Every individual, disregarding the gender, was told to fight for their planet, and that included Quinn's parents. The war went on for years, so he grew up not knowing what his parents looked like. When the humans were on the brink of defeat, a select group of people came forward. These people had special abilities. They began sharing their knowledge of how they obtained such power in hopes of turning the tide in the war, and thankfully, it worked. Even so, the Daki were still strong, and a seemingly endless stalemate led to the peace treaty signing 5 years ago. Obviously enough, human greed got the better of humanity, and instead of sharing these powers with everybody else, the higher-ranked governmental officials decided to keep them for themselves. Only those with money could learn the more powerful abilities while everyone else was left with scraps. It was something that needed to be done. Poverty had taken over the world, but people had powers and were using them uncontrollably, unlike before. Quinn was given nothing when his parents died. The government agreed to pay for his living expenses while he was still in school, but that was it. When his parents died, him being at the age of 10, an agent appeared at his doorstep and handed him a book. He was told that it was the only thing that his parents possessed, one that they passed down when they died. "Why is the world so unfair?" he uttered, lamenting about his situation. Getting out of his bed, he started sauntering towards his desk. He picked up his glasses that were still slightly broken and decided that he needed to fix them. He noticed that one of the lenses was slightly out of place, and tried to punch it back into its frame. "Come on, just get in," he shouted as he tried to forcefully fix the glasses. The frustration he had been bottling up was on his face as he struggled furiously with the lens. Unfortunately, the lens suddenly crumbled into pieces. One of the shards of plastic even created a deep gash in his thumb. He screamed and kicked at the table. "Why does the world hate me?" After a while, he calmed down and started to clean up the little pieces of glass, noticing that a piece had landed on top of his book. As Quinn removed the piece of glass, a drop of blood from his thumb landed on top of the book. The object plastered on the center of the book started to glow, and suddenly, the book began to float, hovering until it was on eye level with Quinn. Quinn darted back and away from it. The glow from the book made his room look emptier with the little bed at the corner and the solitary seat beside it. What the hell is happening? The book started to emit a blinding radiance as it shook uncontrollably. A few seconds later, it finally opened up. Pages after pages were being turned. Quinn couldn't take his eyes off of the shining book. It was as if he was in a deep trance. The words written on the pages of the book weren't in any language that he had seen before. Nevertheless, for some reason, he felt like he could understand it. When the book reached its last page, it started to disappear, gradually turning into dust. At the same time, his body suddenly felt weak. Quinn's vision was starting to fade, and with that, his eyes pulled shut. But just before he passed out, there was a single message that he heard. "Less than congratulations, you have been granted the VA. Greater than." Unable to maintain consciousness long enough to hear the final words, Quinn duly passed out. Slowly Quinn's eyelids started to lift open and his vision started to return. His head felt heavy and his body was slightly sore. As he lifted himself off the ground, he touched his head to see if he had gotten any injuries. Why does my head hurt so much? After making sure his skull hadn't split open from falling over, Quinn then went to pick up his glasses off the floor. Although there was only one lens now in it, Quinn put the glasses on out of habit. Suddenly, he felt a little disorientated and his vision was slightly blurry. He took them back off and noticed that his vision only got blurry when he put the glasses on. Quinn then immediately rushed to his desk to grab a pencil. He drew the letter A on the wall and stepped back. He continued to step back until his back had hit the room wall. What? But how? Quinn thought. Somehow Quinn's vision was now perfect. He had lived his whole life with terrible eyesight, but suddenly he could see clearly. Images then started to flash in his head of what had happened before he passed out and he could think of only one thing, the book. When Quinn looked around the room, he started to panic. The book? Where the hell's the book? Quinn looked everywhere for the book but he couldn't find anything. It couldn't have gone missing in such a small room and its disappearance was making Quinn go mad. Maybe it's like my socks. They go missing all the time. Don't be stupid, this is a book we're talking about, not a sock. Quinn then tried to think hard about what had happened just before he had passed out. He suddenly started to remember the book being lifted into the air. Then just before his eyes closed, he heard a few words. What was it? It sounded like some type of system message. Then as soon as Quinn had said those words, a status screen had appeared right in front of his eyes. Less than user, Quintalon greater than. Less than race, human greater than. Less than level 1 greater than. Less than 0-100 express greater than. Less than HP 10 out of 10 greater than. Less than strength, 10 greater than. Less than agility, 10 greater than. Less than stamina, 10 greater than. Wow, it's like those really old games people used to play all the time. Quinn noticed that on the status screen there were more tabs on the top. Then even without doing anything and just reading the tabs in his head, the screen automatically switched to the less than skills greater than tab. Less than skills greater than. Less than 0 skill points available greater than. Less than skill locked, greater than. Less than skill locked, greater than. On the skills tab, Quinn wasn't really able to see much. Everything seemed to be locked and slightly grayed out, so he quickly moved on to the next tab, less than shop greater than. Less than shop greater than. Less than unlocks at level 10 greater than. Can I do anything? The last tab was the less than quest greater than tab, and finally, it seemed like this tab wasn't locked behind something. Less than main quest greater than. Less than reach level 10 greater than. Less than daily quest, drink 2 liters of water greater than. Less than reward, 5 express greater than. After checking out everything that the system had to offer, Quinn had to just think about closing the system, and it did. When he thought about opening it again, a screen would immediately pop up in front of him. Quinn could only think of one thing. The book his parents had left him was an ability book. These books could often be bought at very high prices from the military or a company, and even on the black market. The only thing was, however, Quinn had never heard of an ability book that disappeared and granted the user a system like this. The ability books were designed to be learnt manually. It wasn't something that you could pick up and instantly understand how to use. A smile started to slowly appear on Quinn's face. This was great news for him. He had always been a level 1 ability user because he could never afford to buy any ability books. Finally, he had something. The next phase was for him to test what ability he had. Fire, fire, come on, Quinn said as he threw the palm of his hand forward. Okay, next. Water, water, out. Quinn did the same again, but there was no result. After trying out many different things and all the abilities he had seen before, it turned out he was unable to perform any of them. What the hell is this useless thing? Is it really just a system ability? Quinn thought about it for a while. If it truly was like a game, then perhaps by completing the quests, he would eventually get stronger and unlock more skills. He was treating it like an ordinary ability book, and clearly what he had obtained wasn't ordinary. Usually, ability books were based around one ability. It was important for a person to select their first ability book because a regular human body would only be able to perform one ability attribute. If you got transformability as your first ability, you would only be able to get other abilities related to this attribute. This was the same for fire, and so on. Quinn then went to open his mini fridge and started to grab the bottles of water that were inside. He immediately started downing the water bottles one by one. Damn, how much is 2 liters? My belly feels like it's going to burst. After finishing his 8th bottle of water, a new notification message had appeared. Less than daily quest complete, 5 express has been granted greater than. Less than 5 100ths greater than. Well, at least I know the system works. Suddenly there was a loud knock that could be heard at the door. Quinn quickly went and opened it. Standing in front of him was a large, muscular, bald-headed man wearing a black military uniform. There were several medals on it and his name written just above his chest. Sergeant Griff. Boy, it is time for you to vacate your room immediately. The vehicle has been waiting outside for 5 minutes already. With everything that had happened, Quinn had forgotten about what was to happen today. It's time for you to head to military school, Griff said. Due to the war between humans and the Daki, everyone was required to go to military school for 2 years. Even though humans and Daki were in a peaceful period, everyone knew that it wouldn't last forever. Every day there was news of one race antagonizing the other and war felt like it could break out at any moment. Quinn quickly went to the toilet before heading off with Sergeant Griff. His bladder felt like it was going to burst any second now due to all the water he drank. Once Quinn stepped out of his room into the outside world, something strange happened. A new notification screen had appeared. Less than your body is being hit by direct sunlight greater than. Less than you are affected by the sunlight greater than. Less than all stats will be halved while in the sunlight greater than. Suddenly, Quinn's body felt extremely sluggish. It felt like he had just gone for a 5K run and returned. His arms and legs felt heavier and there was nothing he could do about it. Quinn then went to check his status and saw that his stats did indeed go down by half. But it wasn't just his stats, his HP was halved as well. Less than HP 5/5 greater than. Less than strength 5/5 greater than. Less than stamina 5/5 greater than. Less than agility 5/5 greater than. What kind of drawback is this? Quinn thought. Then a new notification had appeared. Less than you have received a new daily quest, avoid direct sunlight for 8 hours greater than. Less than reward, 5 express greater than. Quinn's mood slightly changed as soon as he saw the new daily quest. Unlike the water one, this was something he was able to do naturally just by sleeping. If the system worked the same way it did in games, then that meant once Quinn earned 100 express points, he would be able to level up and also increase his stats. So the more daily quests Quinn got, the better it was for him. What are you doing walking so slowly? The school will eat you alive if you carry on like that. Griff shouted. Finally, Quinn had reached a large bus parked just outside his house. When he entered the bus, he noticed that it was already full of students his age. He didn't recognize any of the students though, meaning they had all come from a different school. Quinn then went to sit at the front of the bus, the only seat that was still available. Less than stats have returned to normal greater than. As soon as Quinn had entered the bus and avoided direct sunlight, his stats returned to normal and his body felt re-energized once again. Well, at least it looks like it's only direct sunlight. The students were all talking to each other in excitement, but that stopped as soon as Sergeant Griff came on board. Alright, it's time for us to head to the military academy. The bus then started to move and the students were finally on their way. The bus remained silent during the journey. Whenever a student would start to speak, Griff immediately would glare in their direction and the student would shut up. Griff didn't even have to say anything, they all knew what he wanted just by looking at him. Then about 10 minutes into the journey, Quinn once again received another message. Less than a substance in the air has been detected greater than. Less than you are feeling sleepy greater than. Less than resistance +1 greater than. Quinn found this message quite strange and then when he started to look around the bus, he noticed that nearly all of the students were either asleep or dozing off. Suddenly, even his own eyelids started to feel dizzy. Less than your resistance to the substance has increased greater than. Less than resistance plus 1 greater than. Then he heard the sound of loud footsteps coming towards him. As he looked up he noticed Sergeant Griff hovering above him. Looks like a few of you were able to resist the sleeping gas. Guess we'll just have to bag you. A black bag was then thrown on Quinn's head and his vision now was completely covered. The gas started to slowly seep through and Quinn managed to doze off into a nice sleep. The next moment, Quinn felt a splash of cold water being chucked on his face. He was jolted awake, and all he could see was the green gas. He and several other students started to lift their heads to look around them. There were currently a total of 200 students stood out on a plain open field, but when they looked around they were in a completely foreign place. This is where you will spend the next 2 years of your life. The students were amazed at what they were seeing. They were currently in a city like they had never seen before. Everyone was dressed up in a military uniform and there was technology and feats of engineering around them that was too advanced for their time. Giant robots moving crates and building machines. Flying shish, and levitating trains. It was a technology that hadn't been given to the outside world yet and was kept for the military only. After the first war with the Daki race, the humans had managed to make leaps in all sorts of technological fields. This was because they had managed to salvage equipment from the Daki after the war, but of course, the military decided to keep most of it for themselves. When Quinn finally stopped being amazed at his surroundings, he noticed that there was something placed around his wrist. It looked similar to a digital watch but there was nothing displayed on the screen. That there on your wrist is your lifeline. It will identify you as a student at this military base. It will allow you to access certain areas, pay for food and all sorts of things. That isn't the only thing that it will do though. When not in use, the wristwatch will display a single number. Your power level. As soon as Quinn heard those words, he gritted his teeth and clenched his fist. He thought his life might change, coming to military school, but it seemed like it was going to be the same even here. With that, we will immediately begin the level test for you all, good luck. Griff said with a smile on his face. When abilities were first introduced to the human race, people quickly learnt that some were far more powerful than others. The abilities themselves were also different from person to person. They were dependent on how many mutant cells could be activated within the body. With this came the introduction of the power level system. There were a total of 8 different power levels. These levels indicated how many mutant cells were in the body but not how strong the ability was. They could then be further divided into subcategories. 1.1, 1.2. All the way to 1.9. Although these levels were just a system designed by the military to put everyone in a specified category. There were 2 ways for people to obtain abilities. When the war started with the Daki race, people started to share their powers with the outside world. They wrote down how they accomplished this power and put the information down in things called ability books. After the First War had ended, the books were no longer distributed for free and started to go on sale to the public. The military decided to keep some of the more powerful abilities to themselves. Generally, ability books from level 1 to 5 were sold to the public. In contrast, giant corporations and the military kept the higher level ones to themselves. The second way to obtain an ability was if you were an original. Originals were the first people who had initially discovered the powers for themselves and decided to pass it down within their family. Not writing it down and teaching it from person to person. Not all ability users chose to share their abilities to the outside world and decided to keep it within their bloodline. Originals usually had the strongest of abilities that couldn't be measured using the power system. Because of these 2 reasons, Quinn had always been a level 1. He had no family members to support him, leaving him no chance to buy an ability book, and his family had no abilities themselves, so he wasn't an original. When Quinn had obtained the book, his first guess was that it was some time of an ability book. Now, after all these years, it seemed like he had obtained an ability. But he had never heard of an ability book like this before, and he didn't have a clue what power level it had mutated his cells to. Usually, on the front, there would be a technique that helped you master your ability up to a certain power level. But with the book was now gone. Quinn lifted up his hand to look at the watch, which indicated his current power level was 1. When he looked around, he noticed that everyone else's watches currently showed the same number. Griff was standing in front of all the students and called names in groups of 5. These students would then be transported somewhere to take the test. Quinn was hopeful at first, thinking that he might have been able to change his ability level for once. Still, his mind was quickly changed after receiving a notification. You are being hit by direct sunlight. All stats will be halved. He didn't even know how good 10 strength, 10 agility, and 10 stamina points were. There was nothing he could compare it to. But if his eyesight was anything to go by, then it would mean it was at least the top condition of a normal human being. Right now though, Quinn felt incredibly weak and sluggish. His body felt extremely hot, and he was sweating buckets. Quinn thought it was a good thing he drank a load of water beforehand. Otherwise, he would have been extremely dehydrated. "Hey, are you okay?" the stranger standing next to Quinn said. The stranger had slick blonde hair and hazel green eyes with a chiseled face and sharp jawline. He also stood 6 foot 2 inches tall while Quinn was 5'11". This type of person Quinn would usually avoid at his last shawl, as everyone would always pay attention to them, and boy did Quinn hate attention. "If you want, I can call someone for help," the stranger said. "It's okay, I'm just a little bit nervous about the testing," Quinn said as he tried to ignore his tired body and stand up straight. The stranger looked Quinn up and down. Quinn was quite skinny for his age. He didn't have a lot of muscle on him, and right now, he looked incredibly weak. He thought Quinn looked like the type of boy who would have gotten bullied at school. Being in a new place and not knowing anyone power levels, of course, he would be nervous. If he was to get a level 1 rating again, the same thing would most likely happen here. "Well, don't be. I'm quite strong, you know. If anyone messes with you, you can come and ask me for help," the stranger said, smiling. Quinn didn't usually get on with the active, positive type of person, but found it hard to dislike the boy. When Quinn thought back about his time at school, he realized he actually didn't get on with anyone. "The name's Vorden said as he placed his hand out. Quinn looked at Vorden's hand. It was actually the first time in his life someone had treated him this way, but he thought that would quickly change. People always did once they found out his ability level. But for once, he just wanted to forget about all that. "My name's Quinn," Quinn said as he shook Vorden's hand. "Less than use of an ability has been detected greater than. Less than the ability has been rejected greater than." Once the system messages appeared, Quinn looked at them strangely. He then noticed that Vorden still hadn't let go of his hand. Then the system repeated the message once again. Less than use of ability had been detected greater than. Less than the ability had been rejected greater than. Quinn then immediately let go of Vorden's hand. The system was clearly telling him that Vorden was trying to use his ability on him. Vorden himself even had a puzzled look on his face as he stood there still. Vorden said. "What is your ability?" Quinn paused, thinking for a while whether he should answer or not. In the end, he wanted to see Vorden's real reaction. "I don't have an ability." Vorden no longer had a puzzled look on his face, as if the answer had satisfied his curiosity, but before he could say anything, Griff made an announcement. "Will the students Quinn Talon, Vorden Blade, Peter Chuck, Layla Munro, and Aaron Hala please come to the front to take your test?" Once the 5 students had heard their names being called up, each of them began to walk forwards to Griff, who was waiting for them in front. Including Quinn and Vorden, there was another boy in their group, Peter. Peter looked more nervous than anyone there. He would constantly look around him and he couldn't stop fidgeting either. His body frame was quite small, but it suited him, for he wasn't that tall either. Then there were the 2 girls. The first one was named Layla and the other one was Erin. Layla had short brown hair and a tall figure. On her back, she was carrying a bow, which surprised Quinn, for not many people carried a weapon these days apart from a specific group of people called the Pure. They were a group of people who chose to not have any abilities and instead used weapons. But they were very rare and Quinn had never met anyone like that in his life. He had only heard stories about them. Finally, there was Erin. Erin was the type of girl that turned all of the boys' heads. Her proportions were perfect, not too big not too small, and she had long silky hair. Her hair was a beautiful golden hue. The only problem was her facial expressions. Even while walking through the crowds of people, not once did her expression change. It stayed stiff and neutral. As Quinn was walking past everyone, he noticed that he couldn't recognize any students there, and it seemed like the others didn't seem to be familiar with anybody either. Quinn could only assume that this was done on purpose. On top of that, no one knew who to befriend or who to look out for because currently, everyone's power level displayed 1. The group had stopped just behind another group who were being transported to the testing area. As soon as Vorden saw the others who were in the same group, Vorden greeted each one of them with a handshake. Vorden was being very polite, so most of them accepted his greetings apart from Erin. She merely stared at Vorden's hand when he offered it out to her, before she turned her head and looked away. "Come on, you don't have to be like that," Vorden said as he placed his hand on her shoulder. This was a big mistake. In an instant, Erin grabbed for Vorden's wrist and twisted his hand. Frost and ice crept up his hand as it began to freeze. Everyone stopped to look at the commotion that was happening near the front. "Wow, she has ice abilities. Isn't that very rare? I would let her freeze me any day." Griff noticed the commotion and started to intervene. "Stop it, you two. If you have that much energy, then save it for the test." Erin immediately dropped Vorden's hand and slowly, Vorden's hand started to defrost. Vorden then went back in line to stand next to Quinn. "Can you believe her?" Vorden complained, "I nearly lost my hand." "You can't just go around touching people without their permission," Quinn replied. "Yeah, I know, she's lucky I didn't wipe the floor with her just cause she's a pretty girl." Many people who were near the front had heard Vorden's word and had already decided to make him an enemy. A thought formed in their heads: if they could somehow humiliate Vorden, then maybe Erin would look their way. Looking at the people around them, Quinn could tell what the others were thinking. Quinn then stepped one step away from Vorden, hoping that others wouldn't think the two were friends. At last, Quinn and the others were called forward and were told to stand inside a box. It wasn't really a box per se, but they were white lines that had been drawn on the ground. The space inside of it was just big enough to fit the 5 of them in. One would notice that outside of the box, there was a hooded man. They were standing nearby. "Send them away," Griff said. As soon as Griff gave the command, the hooded man planted both of his hands on the ground and the box started to light up, shining a bright purple color. Transportation magic, huh? What a rare ability," Vorden said right before the whole group suddenly vanished into thin air. The very next second, they were teleported to another outdoor area which resembled an empty wasteland. There was no sign of life, no trees, nothing at all. Standing in front of the group was a woman dressed in a black military uniform, and by her side was another hooded man. There was not another person in sight. The woman held a tablet in her hand and it looked like she was currently busy inputting some information. Once she had finished, she looked up at the group and began to speak. "Hello to the 5 of you, I am Jane and I will be the one in charge of your test today. Once the test has been completed, I will be updating your information and your score will then be reflected on your wristwatches." Jane then started to look at the tablet. "Now who should we call first? Oh, it looks like we have a couple of previous level 1s. Jane said as she checked the information. The information had been passed on from their previous schools. "Peter, would you please step forward?" The nervous, small Peter then stepped forward and he looked even worse than before. Quinn thought he looked bad, but he looked to be in perfect condition if you were to compare the two. At least Quinn was able to stand up, whereas Peter looked like he would fall over any second now. "Would you please tell me what your ability is, Peter?" Jane asked. I don't have any ability," Peter said quietly. Suddenly, Quinn and the others understood why Peter was so nervous. Having no ability wasn't rare. Because of the war, many children had become orphans like Quinn and Peter. This meant there was no chance for them to buy an ability book. But because Peter had no ability, he was afraid of the treatment he would get from the others. "Don't be afraid, Peter," Jane said. "Here, take this." The hooded man that stood at Jane's side suddenly teleported a book into his hand, allowing it to be taken by Jane. She then handed the book over to Peter. "Wow, seriously, you're giving this to me for free?" Peter said in excitement. "Thank you. Please study the book in your own free time. When you have finally learned to use it, you can come back to redo the test, but for now I'll have to temporarily award you a level 1 power status." Even though Peter had received a level 1 power status, he didn't care for it. At this moment he only felt hope. His life could finally turn around due to the book that he had just received. "Now I believe there was another level 1 user here," Jane said. "Quinn, is it? Would you please step forward?" Quinn did as he was told and stepped forward. "Now Quinn, what ability do you have?" Quinn thought the entire thing was ridiculous. It was quite clear to him that Jane already had all the information on him from his previous school. They knew that he never had an ability before. The problem was Quinn was struggling with deciding what to do. Before coming to military school, Quinn had done a bit of research himself. He knew that the military freely gave all students who had no ability their very own ability book. And each ability book given to them was the very same one. Each one received an Earth ability book. The reason they did this was so students who didn't have an ability before would suddenly feel indebted to the military. Not only that, but the military also had a hold on nearly all of the Earth-type ability books. Meaning if you ever wanted to increase your strength, you would have to be loyal to the military, and in return, they would give you more power. Before Quinn had discovered his own ability, he actually thought this was the best option for him. Even if he didn't want to join the military after 2 years, the Earth ability was handy to have. It was easy for employment because the Earth ability was useful in construction. This was where the problem came in. Quinn already having an ability meant he was unable to learn a new one. The ability book that would be given was practically useless. But not only that, Quinn was pretty sure they would keep tabs on every student they had given the ability book to, meaning the teachers would expect him to use Earth powers the next time they saw him. Quinn took a deep breath and said, "I don't have an ability." Just like before, the hooded man standing by her side would hand her a book and then she handed it to Quinn. Quinn took the book from Jane at first, but then suddenly, a notification screen appeared. Less than unable to learn this ability, greater than. Less than would you like to convert the book into 10 express. Greater than. Quinn had somewhat expected the system to display the first message, but the second one truly had surprised him. Quinn was really tempted to take the book and use it as a form of express, but he knew there would be questions asked later on. "I'm sorry, but I don't want it," Quinn said as he handed the book back to Jane. The students watching and the instructor stood there were both shocked. Jane hadn't experienced anything like this before. In her 5 years working as an instructor, it was the first time someone with no ability had rejected the book. "Please give me one moment." Jane then stood away from the group of students far enough so they wouldn't be able to hear anything. Yes, he says he doesn't want the ability book, what should I do?" Jane asked, speaking on her earpiece. "Let him take the test," the mysterious man on the phone said. As the man hung up, he couldn't help but think that Quinn was an interesting student. He began to check on Quinn's file and what he had said seemed to be true. The student had no ability and didn't seem to have any relations with the group Pure either. "Let's see how long you can survive in this cruel world, Quinn," the man said. Back at the testing field, Jane had finished the call with her superior and started to head back over to the group. "Sorry for waiting," Jane said. "Since you won't be taking the ability book, we will still require you to take the test, please." Quinn thought the whole thing was a joke. If Quinn truly had no ability, then they already knew what the test results were going to be. Was there really a need for him to take the test? It felt like the only reason they wanted Quinn to continue was to make him feel humiliated and small. Eventually, he would then choose to approach the military and beg for the ability book they were handing out. "Please follow me." Jane then took Quinn a little further out onto the field where Quinn noticed that there were huge craters in the ground, burn marks, and all sorts of things. This was all done from the previous testing contestants. "Please proceed to destroy the targets in front of you as quick as you can," Jane said. "The test will begin immediately." As soon as Jane finished talking, 3 targets popped up randomly around the wasteland. They were metal round targets with a red dot in the center. The problem was when Quinn tried to look for the targets, everything seemed like a blur in the distance. Quinn then realized that his perfect eyesight suddenly wasn't so perfect. Is this because I'm out in the sunlight? Quinn thought. Quinn had no choice but to slowly run up to each of the targets and hit them with his fist one by one. His time was incredibly slow, of course. There were then 2 further tests that Quinn needed to complete. The next test was a strength test where Quinn was asked to punch into a huge drum-like machine. Quinn gave it his best shot and hit the drum as hard as he could. The drum vibrated and made a small sound, eventually displaying a digital number in the center. 5. Strength, Jane said as she noted it down on her tablet. When the final test had arrived, they had brought out another machine. This machine was a big circular object with many holes on its front. Once the test started, the machine fired holographic spikes at the contestants. All Quinn needed to do was avoid being hit by the spikes. The machine went up in levels and eventually got faster and shot out more spikes. In the end, Quinn managed to get hit by the spikes and the test was stopped. Agility, 5 inches, Jane said once again as she noted it down on her tablet. Quinn had heard the words from Jane's mouth and it started to make him think if there was some kind of link between the scores she had given him. The last test was a test of strength and Quinn had scored a 5, similar to his system which had stated he had 5 strength. Then once again this test focused on agility and scored a 5, which was the same as his system. This meant if Quinn was to take the test at night, all of his scores would have most likely doubled. This also meant as long as he leveled up, he could always increase his score. It was as if his ability was the ability to evolve, but it also had some drawbacks with it as well. As expected, Jane said, unfortunately your current power level is a level 1. Quinn clenched his fist and went back to stand with the others. He knew that the days ahead of him as a level 1 user would be harsh, but that wouldn't be that way for much longer. The test continued with Layla taking the text after him. She was the only one there who had a weapon on her back. The weapon she had was a bow, but it didn't look like a regular bow, it was different from the ones that people used a long time ago. This bow was carved using parts of a beast. It was black in color and looked almost as if the entire bow was made of gems. Even the string was made of a special material. The reason the bow looked so different was because it was what was known as a beast weapon. A bow made from the body parts of a beast. When the human race was attacked by the Daki, our technology advanced fast by replicating their technology, and with this, the humans learned the ability to travel to other planets using portals. These planets would often contain different levels of beasts. The stronger the beast was, the better weapon you could make out of it. It was the first time Quinn had ever witnessed a beast weapon before, as no one at his previous school had one. It was strange to see someone of such a young age, who has most likely never been to another planet, to have a beast weapon. Layla stood in the center of the field and waited for the test to start. Unlike when it was Quinn's turn, they waited until she was ready before starting. Quinn could already start to see a difference in treatment. When the test started, 5 targets all appeared in different areas of the wasteland. Layla immediately took out 5 arrows and placed them in her bow, shooting them all off at once in the same direction. The arrows shot out fast and strong, but then suddenly, the 5 arrows split off into their own direction, each of them heading to a different target. What a good combo, Vorden said. She has the ability of telekinesis, but it's quite weak. So instead she uses her ability combined with the bow to control the arrow's movements. In an instant, all 5 of the targets were hit at the same time and she had completed the first test. Quinn for the first time saw how useful beast weapons were. Even if you had a weak ability, you could make it strong. Quinn wasn't completely sure what his ability was yet, but even if it just increased his stats as he leveled up, he then thought about how handy something like a beast sword or something similar would be. On the strength test, Layla didn't do so well. She used her powers to try to move her fist even faster when punching the drum, but, in the end, her score was only an 8. The last test Quinn also saw her do quite bad. When the test first started, Layla tried to use her ability on the spikes coming at her. Unknown to her because they were holograms and not the real thing, it had no effect. Meaning all Layla could do was rely on her actual body to avoid the spikes. In the end, Layla ended getting the same score as Quinn. It looks like you have the ability level of a level 2 user, Jane said, and immediately the number 2 appeared on Layla's wrist. Quinn could tell Layla wasn't happy. She stomped back as she walked over to the group. Quinn thought the test wasn't really fair. Her ability level might be that of a level 2, but when used with a bow, Quinn felt like she could have easily beaten some level 3 or 4 users. Quinn was starting to take note that the academy really did only measure the power level of your ability and not your fighting ability. The next person to take the test was Erin. She walked forward confidently without even looking at anyone else. She stood in the center of the testing field waiting for the test to start. 5 random targets then appeared across the wasteland. She quickly formed an ice spear and chucked it at the target, hitting it dead on. She did this one after the other at an incredible speed, nearly clearing them all just as fast as Layla did. The next test, Erin was even more impressive. She started to gather ice in both her palms, and then after a minute or so of gathering her power, a huge ice column shot out from her hands and hit the center of the drum dead on. The drum rang out louder than it had before, and the number kept going up until it had eventually reached 50. "No wonder she's so confident," Vorden said. Quinn suddenly thought it was a good thing the two of them didn't fight, otherwise Vorden would have been a dead man. Finally, when it was time for the last test, the instructor told her she wasn't allowed to use her ability and should just dodge. Erin had no reaction and started the test immediately. She managed to do well, moving swiftly, avoiding each spike, but eventually, the machine had gotten too fast and she ended up getting hit. "Impressive," Jane said. "Best result so far, power level 5. Erin continued to walk back to her group as if she knew what she was going to get all along, either that or she didn't really care about the whole thing. Finally, the last person to take the test in the group was Vorden. "Time to show you what I got, wish me luck." Quinn had no clue who Vorden was talking to, but Quinn quickly realized it was him after Vorden gave a wink in his direction as he walked off to the center of the field. Could that idiot actually be strong? Quinn quietly asked himself. Most of the time people who strong were either arrogant about their powers or kept it quiet, but Vorden was a strange person. He wasn't exactly arrogant, but a more flashy kind of person. When it finally came to his turn and the test had started, everyone's mouth was left wide open at what they were seeing. On every single one of the tests, Vorden had done the exact same thing as Erin. He had used the same ability, the ability of ice, and had performed just as well. "See, I told you I was strong," Vorden said as he showed the number 5 to his new best friend, Quinn. Just what was Vorden's ability? Quinn thought. After seeing Vorden perform well on the test, Quinn couldn't help but think about what Vorden's ability was. When Vorden went to shake his hand that time, he said that Vorden had tried to use his ability on Quinn. Yet for some reason, his ability didn't work. If Vorden's ability was ice, surely his hand would have just frozen. That's unless Quinn had an ability to block all types of abilities, but that was highly unlikely. Not only that, but straight after, even Vorden had a strange reaction, asking Quinn what his ability was. It was as if he knew his ability didn't work. Then another thought came into Quinn's mind. Why was Vorden so adamant on shaking the hands of everyone he had just met? If Quinn remembered correctly, Erin refused to shake Vorden's hand, yet in the end, Vorden still went to touch Erin on the shoulder. At that time, it seemed like a weird thing to do, but now Quinn realized it wasn't, and everything was starting to make sense. Touching was the condition, and the last person who Quinn touched was Erin. It couldn't be a coincidence that both of them had the same powers, which meant most likely that Vorden's ability was the kind to copy other people's ability. It didn't work on Quinn because his ability wasn't straightforward. Quinn couldn't help his curiosity, so he asked Vorden. "Hey, Vorden, is your ability?" Quinn whispered, "Are you able to copy other people's abilities?" Vorden looked at Quinn and smiled. "I'm surprised you figured it out so fast. How did you figure it out? When you shook my hand, you seemed surprised that nothing happened." Vorden thought that Quinn was quite amazing, being able to guess something like that just from a handshake. After all, it was much more likely that Vorden had obtained the ice ability from an ability book. The power for copying wasn't available as an ability book, which only meant one thing. "Are you an original?" Quinn asked. Vorden didn't say anything but simply gave a wink back at Quinn, which pretty much confirmed Quinn's thoughts. Vorden was an original, a person belonging to a family who decided to not share their abilities with the outside world. He is someone who could easily surpass the power level of 8. Once the test has been completed, the hooded man teleported the students to the front of the academy where they would be staying. The academy was huge, and it's the tallest building in the entire city. It was as if someone had put together 3 hotels. There were 10 different teachers in total who were currently standing in front of the academy's facade. Tarrying in front of them were the groups of students who all had finished taking the test. The students were told to wait with the teachers until all the students had finished conducting their tests. Once in a while, a group of 5 students would be teleported in front of one of the teachers. Finally, there was now a total of 20 students in the group where Quinn was a part of. "Okay, you all need to follow me as I take you around the school," the teacher up front said. The teacher was a middle-aged man with blonde curly hair who wore glasses. His name was Dell. While Dell was walking around, describing the various places in the vicinity of the academy, he couldn't help but smile. It looked like nothing would be able to upset him. "You guys should start to get to know each other as much as you can," Dell said. "After all, the people you are with now will be your classmates." All of a sudden, everyone started to get chattier, talking to each other as they were being shown around the school. However, there was something that Quinn had noticed. The mid-levels were trying their best to get friendly with the higher levels, while the low levels were completely being ignored. Accordingly, Quinn and Peter were the only 2 level 1s in the class. Without realizing it, they had been pushed to the back of the group, and Peter was plodding along with his head held down. It seemed to have affected Peter a lot more than Quinn, but the latter had already suspected that this would happen. Although suddenly, a familiar voice was heard calling out Quinn's name. "There you are," Vorden said. "Man, people just started jumping all over me. Then all of a sudden, I look to my right side, and you're gone. Come on, let's look around together, friend." Quinn truly thought that Vorden was a strange person, yet that wasn't a bad thing. Vorden then noticed Peter, who was on his own as well. "Come on, stop being a downer and you come over here too." Peter looked up and pointed a finger to himself. "Who else do you think I'm talking to?" Vorden questioned Peter. The 3 of them continued to hang at the back of the class while the teacher continued to tour around the school. In the midst of the tour, a battle arena was shown to the students, where they had similar testing equipment to the ones filed on the wasteland, as well as several square fighting platforms. They were also shown their homeroom classes, battle classes, sports rooms, and all sorts of facilities. Dell never failed to provide a little bit of explanation about each area of the school where they visited. However, Quinn was uninterested in most of them until they had finally reached the library. As you can all see, the library here is split into 3 floors. First-year students are only able to access the first floor. Meanwhile, the second-year students can access the second floor. Finally, the last floor is only for military personnel. Quinn was interested in the library because it contained books that weren't available to the public. In this place, Quinn just might be able to find some information about his ability, though he just hoped that it would be on the first floor. Eventually, the tour came to an end as Dell stopped just outside the school's dorms. "And this is where you will be living during your stay here. Once you have dropped off your things, feel free to explore around the academy. There will be no lessons today, so you will get to have the rest of the afternoon to explore." Each student was then handed a number written on a piece of paper. These papers displayed which room they would be staying in. Quinn then noticed from the corner of his eye that Vorden was coming towards him. "Hey, Quinn, what room number did you get?" Vorden asked. "Air 23. "No way. You're kidding, right? I got the same number. Maybe fate is really bringing us together," Vorden said excitedly. "Maybe," Quinn replied. On the other hand, somewhere down the hallway, 2 other students were having a conversation. "Whoa, what happened to you?" a student said as he looked at his friend. "I don't know, man, some guy just appeared and hit me out of nowhere, forcing me to swap room numbers." "Man, should we try to get it back?" the student asked. "Nah, if I saw his wrist correctly, it said he was a level 5. It's best if we just leave it." After Quinn had finished unpacking, he was free to do what he wanted for the rest of the day. It was still noon, so he had plenty of time to explore the academy and do whatever he wished. Quinn was currently sharing his room with 2 people, and to his surprise, he knew both of them. One of them was Vorden while the other was Peter. There were 3 single beds in the room, each spread out from one another evenly, but other than that, the room was pretty empty. There was just a single desk and a cupboard for each person to use by the side of their bed. Students were expected to spend most of their time studying or practicing their skills. There was no time for pleasure. Which was why the rooms were designed the way they were. "What do you guys want to do then?" Vorden asked. "I'm still unpacking, you two don't have to wait for me, do what you want," Peter replied. Peter had opened up a little to the two of them. At first he was completely shy and hardly said a word, but slowly Peter seemed to be coming out of his shell, especially around Quinn. Peter most likely felt comfortable around Quinn, knowing that he was a level 1 ability user like himself. "I was thinking of heading to the library," Quinn replied. "That will probably be too boring for you." "Boring? I can make anything fun, besides I haven't read a book in." Vorden paused for a while. "I can't even remember the last time I read a book." The 3 of them laughed, and then Vorden and Quinn decided to head to the library together. Finally, they had arrived and the first floor was already busy with students. Quinn noticed that there were multiple round desks spread out where students were sitting, and in the middle of the desk was a glowing orb. "Ah, you're probably wondering what that orb thing is in the middle, aren't you?" Vorden asked. "It looks like they don't have them at public schools. If you touch the orb, then it allows you to create a space. In that space, only those people who have been invited can be heard. This way people are able to talk and chat as much as they want while not disturbing others. Technology sure has come a long way." Quinn and Vorden then chose a table that had 2 other people sitting on the other side. Just as Vorden had said, Quinn could see the 2 talking but couldn't hear a word of what they were saying. The orb seemed to only have a range of the table though. Once you left the table, others were able to hear you as normal. Quinn went looking around the library and picked out as many books as he could about abilities. Most of them describing what different types of abilities the world had. Vorden wasn't too bothered and decided to just select a random fiction book to read. The 2 sat at their tables while Quinn started to flick away. After reading several books, Quinn had discovered nothing new. He already knew about most of the abilities written in the book, but not one of them mentioned an ability like Quinn's. Vorden had been keeping a close eye on Quinn and noticed the type of books he had been picking out. "What's with all the books? Are you looking for something in particular?" Quinn thought about it for a while before giving Vorden an answer. Vorden wasn't the brightest person when it came to academics, but he was quite knowledgeable about abilities, it seemed. He would have to be because of the type of ability he had. "I was trying to decide what ability to get since I turned down the school's offer." "Oh right, I forgot about that. I thought you might have been one of those pure members who hate abilities. Turns out you just didn't want to be a dog to the military." Vorden replied. "Well, is there anything specific you're looking for?" "Not really, I have no clue. There was one that said something interesting though. Have you ever heard of an ability that is weaker in sunlight?" Vorden suddenly started to laugh out loud. "What, are you crazy? I've never heard of something like that. Abilities are something our bodies learn. Sure, some people have limits and can't learn stronger spells or can do less than others, but for one to get weaker because of the sun. Sounds like you're a vampire or something." Quinn felt a little embarrassed by Vorden's reaction. Of course, Quinn knew this would be the normal reaction when asking something like this, but it was true. As long as Quinn was in direct sunlight, all of his stats would weaken by half. Quinn continued to look around the library to see if there was anything else he could find. He had finally gone through every single one of the ability books he could find, but there was nothing. Quinn then looked up at the floor above where there were some second-year students. "Maybe there's something up there, but I can't imagine what the academy would do to me for breaking the rules," Quinn thought. As Quinn continued to walk around the library, he had eventually ventured into the fiction section and his eyes were drawn to something. A specific title of a book named, "The Truth About Vampires." Quinn took out the book and gave it a quick look. Vampires were things of fairy tales, myths even. Even when people started to come out with powers, there was not one person who came out claiming to be a vampire. Quinn couldn't help himself but start to read the book. It was a long shot, but maybe he would find something he could relate to. After reading and skimming through the book, Quinn found most of it was useless. A lot of the things that vampires didn't relate to him at all. Vampires were required to eat human blood. Some could transform themselves into bats and cast illusions, while others were incredibly skilled with the sword and hypnosis, but Quinn had none of these things. The only thing he could relate to in the book was being weaker in the sun. Eventually, Quinn decided to close the book and call it a day. It didn't seem like he was going to find anything from the first floor of the library. As soon as Quinn closed the book though, a familiar sound was heard. Ding. Less than you gained more knowledge about the system greater than. Less than 10 express received greater than. Less than 15 100ths express greater than. It couldn't be, could it?